It is my great pleasure to introduce our guest speaker this morning. For many of you, you know her well. Others of us will be meeting her for the first time. Linda Tolliday is a beloved and esteemed leader in this congregation. Among many of her roles include serving as board president, serving as chair of our worship arts team, and one of my favorite roles, she was co-chair of the search committee that found me and invited me to come to Fresno. She is an accomplished and devoted teacher of young people, has given her life to that and the pursuit of science. Life has brought an unexpected change to Linda. Life has brought her new love, and a new adventure is about to unfold tomorrow morning when she moves to Bishop with Steve. And so I invited Linda to reflect on the many years she has been a member of this church and how she has changed over the years. Please welcome Linda Tolliday.
I'm cut off from the typical support of family and friends that most new mothers get to enjoy. The women on this support board were really nice. They gushed over every milestone. They were sweet. They were kind. They praised God and Jesus for this new miracle in their lives. And by praise, I mean their response to anything shared by anyone tended to be, praise the Lord, 50 women giving God attaboys for whatever they or their babies achieved. It was a lovely place for them. It wasn't the right place for me. But while on that website, I discovered an online group called Atheist Parenting. Aha! Okay, so on that board, I found a group of women who were really nice and gushed over every milestone, but attributed those milestones to human development and worked together to figure out how to raise children in a society where belief in God is the given, but it wasn't shared by us. Every couple of weeks, one of those very nice women from the original Mothers Group, or one just like it, would also discover there was a board called Atheist Parenting and decide they needed to intervene strictly for the sake of the children. Of course, they would come into our safe space and proceed to explain we were damning our children to eternal hellfire. Consequently, we got really good at a rather new sort of activity, one I enjoy to this day, arguing with strangers on the internet. Pretty soon, it became clear I usually had a partner in these discussions, a poster who went by the name of Secular Mom. She was a humanist with a son just a little older than my son, and I found out a little later that she was living here in Central California. Over the next few years, as I moved to Pakistan, and then the events of September 11th brought my children and I back to California, Secular Mom and I stayed in touch. She began telling me about a church she had found, a church where she was accepted, where her lack of belief in God wasn't a hindrance, and where her son found other kids who didn't tell him he was going to hell. One Sunday morning in 2005, 10 years after meeting her on the internet, I finally met Secular Mom in person when I first walked into the Unitarian Universalist Church of Fresno, the spiritual home she had found. Those of you who belonged to the church back then knew Secular Mom well, if not under that name. It was the lovely June Riley. Mike's still with us in the band. That first day I attended church in our sweet little redwood building over on Millbrook was memorable for many reasons beyond that incredible opportunity to actually connect with June in person. Then Reverend Brian Jessup was preaching that day. I don't remember the topic, but the church was under the flight pattern of the Air Guard, and true confession, my dad used to be squadron commander at the Air Guard, so I always have mixed feelings about this one. But I remember Brian stopping, slamming the pulpit and saying, we're a part of it. We're part of this military complex. We have responsibility too. There was this band that played incredible music, and after the service, there was a meeting to further discuss the purchase and construction and move to this property, which was then in the planning stages. I asked if I could stay and was told I'd be more than welcome. The intentionality of everyone in that meeting, even during fairly heated discussions over some issue or another, was very impressive. People clearly liked each other. And so I came back. And I came for myself. I hear people talk about joining a church so their children have a spiritual grounding. That wasn't my motivation in coming to the Unitarian Universalist Church of Fresno on a Sunday morning. Being here spoke to me. Pretty soon I did bring my kids, though. I was divorced at the time, and coming to church the weekends I didn't have my children. Their father began taking them to a church where they were told their good thoughts come from God and their bad thoughts come from the devil. My Benji, then about 9, said, Mom, it's ridiculous. It's like they've never heard of personal responsibility. And so I invited the boys to accompany me to a church that did, in fact, make you personally responsible for your own thoughts. Not only did they get to avoid attending a church they weren't fond of, but my kids and later my stepchildren loved being part of the children's and later youth groups here at the church. They particularly enjoyed the middle school neighboring faiths program, where kids from the church went every month to a different faith tradition here in the valley and learned about it, attended services. They were very fond of their high school YRUU friendships. Mitch, my oldest son, went to summer camp in Big Bear, meeting other UU teens from all over California, and he attended the first Social Justice Unitarian Universalist General Assembly in Phoenix, Arizona. My stepdaughter Alexandria went with the youth group to GA in Portland years later. For those of you who were here last week to see the beautiful tradition that is our bridging ceremony, Mitch bridged with Minister Brian Jessup. Ben bridged with Sophia Betancourt, who will this week or next be elected the president of the entire Unitarian Universalist Association, served here for 2 years as an interim minister. And then Alexandria bridged in the first year or so after we called Reverend Tim. A lot of change in those days for us. But I titled this sermon, Don't Be Afraid of Some Change. I better get to that part. I want to frame the changes I've been through during my time at this church using 3 common UU aphorisms. What we know about God is a piece of the truth. This church needs your time, talent, and treasure. And we need not think alike to love alike. What we know about God is a piece of the truth. When I first attended church here, I was not just an atheist. I could probably be labeled an anti-theist, and I was obnoxious with it. I struggled with any language we used that was shared by other faith traditions. I was offended if asked to pray, if told to have faith. Even the term church bothered me. And I wasn't alone. At the time, the church had a few of us who really didn't deal well with religious language. Some, like me, were unchurched. Others had perhaps been wounded by the faith traditions they came from. So the phrase common in the children's program, what we know about God is a piece of the truth, was difficult for me. I thought it presupposed the existence of God, and I didn't know why that was the default position. Very early on in my church attendance, I heard the Reverend Brian Jessup say something that really struck me. He said, "We are heretics." From the Greek heretikos, meaning able to choose, and he always added, and responsible for the choice. So if heretic doesn't necessarily mean what I thought it meant, maybe the same is true for other typically religious terms. Take the term worship. When I joined the Worship Associates, as our worship arts team used to be called, I was curious why we used the term, why we called Sunday services worship services when we weren't worshiping God as a centerpiece of that service. At Worship Associates training, we defined worship as worth shaping, its original meaning. I don't have to worship something else to want to work at shaping my own worth and hoping to offer something that helps other folks in shaping their worth as well. Or the word faith. I don't have faith that a higher power will step in and affect my life, but I absolutely do have faith. Things I believe based not on my scientist mind's need for evidence, but based on what I feel and think. I have faith in my friends, in my family, in love, that people are basically good, most of them anyway. For me, faith isn't passive, though. It's something I do. It's something I work at. There's still those moments. One summer, Lorenzo suggested a service on international adoption, as he knew a couple living near him who had adopted children from China and Vietnam. I volunteered to lead the service because that couple happened to be very dear friends of mine. During the development of the service, I found a song I sent to Lorenzo I thought would be good. He agreed to use it. Thank you, Lorenzo. It was the tale of a woman who'd given her daughter up for adoption at 3 days old because she didn't think she could provide for this young person and she wanted her to have a better life. Lorenzo asked Bernadette Planting to sing the song. What neither of us knew was that Bernadette had been given up for adoption at 3 days old by her mother, who wanted her to have a better life because she couldn't provide for her. Just a few weeks after my first Sunday attending church, it was the annual church picnic, then held at Woodward Park. I knew almost no one. I went anyway, and Babs Eskin made sure I met lots and lots of people while I was there. Lorenzo and Mike Riley and some others were playing music in a circle, and I sat next to this woman, started chatting with her, and she said, "What do you do?" And I said, "I'm a middle school science teacher, but I'm looking for a position." And she said, "That's funny. I'm a middle school science teacher, and my school is looking for someone." I said, "Where do you work?" And she said, "Thomas Jefferson in Madera." I said, "I'm interviewing Tuesday." We didn't disclose that we knew each other. Sorry if anyone from TJ is watching. And I spent 17 years working in Madera Unified with Deanna Lockling as a dear friend. Those kind of coincidences don't make me believe in mysterious supernatural forces at work, but they do remind me of our faith's seventh principle, the interconnected web of all existence of which we are a part, which my son Mitch once rather facetiously dubbed the world's longest name for God. And I guess that brings me back to what I know about God is a piece of the truth after all. 2, this church needs your time, talent, and treasure. And you folks that joined today heard a version of that. You'll hear it a lot, I promise. All of us know that phrase. When I first attended this church, I grew up unchurched. I knew nothing about what it meant to be part of a church community. I didn't know how a church was organized. I didn't know how it was run. I didn't know how it was financed. I didn't know anything. I didn't understand how time, talent, and treasure applied to me. After all, I was new. I was a single working mom. I was a teacher. It wasn't like I had a lot of time or money. And I wasn't a musician or something like that, so I didn't think talent applied either. I really didn't get it. My first involvement with the church was small but vital. I showed up on Sunday mornings. Please do. After a while, okay, maybe 2 weeks, someone approached me and asked if I'd like to serve coffee on a Sunday morning. And I did that for a while. I was a greeter in my first year, and I can still remember my embarrassment after I cheerfully asked one of the church's venerable, beloved, elder founding members if they were new that Sunday. They were very nice. I've taught our whole lives, our UU human sexuality curriculum, led midweek youth hangout time, taught summer experiences, been involved in chalice circles, participated in adult religious education. I signed up to light the chalice one Sunday. I still remember walking up terrified to speak in front of everyone. But speaking here turns out to be my passion, and it didn't take me long to become part of the worship associates team. I still remember our first day training. We were told about various tasks and levels of involvement in crafting worship, from being a sort of background person who makes sure everything's where it needs to be, to lay leading, which is what I do when Reverend Tim's not here, and you put together all the elements of service, except, of course, Lorenzo's fabulous music, but you work with Lorenzo. It's the more involved job. So, you start with the behind-the-scenes tasks, naturally, as you do in any organization. We had a guest speaker coming up who was going to be speaking on mental health, a topic near and dear to my heart, so I volunteered to do that background work. And immediately was told I should lead the service. I was new enough to the church that I didn't recognize that people here tend to believe you can do far more than you think you can. So when you volunteer for something, they help you rapidly increase your commitment regardless of what you originally may have thought you were getting yourself into. So a lot of people nodding. After a couple of these services were under my belt, I was approached to chair Sunday Services Committee. I was deeply flattered. That's another thing they use, by the way. And then it was, will you serve on the board and chair the worship arts team? And the congregation believes you are a trusted individual. Will you serve on the ministerial search committee? To the newest members of the church that joined us today, bless you for being with us. I'm not saying your once-a-month commitment to greeting or coffee is going to turn into a year-long, multiple time a week and most weekend stint on a ministerial search committee, but you never know. Mostly, you need to know what I didn't. This church needs whatever time you have, large or small. Whatever treasure you can give, large or small, they'd prefer large. And that your talents may be in areas you haven't discovered yet, so try things out and see what calls to you. Lastly, we need not think alike to love alike. This one's tricky. I mean, intellectually, we all know this is true. But really, shouldn't we mostly be thinking alike? We all affirm and promote the same 7, maybe 8 principles. We all went through classes or at least talks about what Unitarian Universalism is. There are a lot of values that if we didn't share, we'd not be here in this church in the first place. So we do think alike about many things. But that doesn't translate to thinking alike about everything. In fact, there are any number of witticisms about how many Unitarian Universalists it takes to reach agreement about everything and how famously fond we are of forming committees. And it turns out we can feel as passionately that we are correct about the tiny things we don't agree on as other folks can feel about major issues they don't agree about. Nowhere is that more evident than a committee meeting. And the more vital the task is, the more evident and critical those differences of opinions can be. I believe part of that is because we chose this faith tradition, we decided to be part of this church community, we did a lot of discernment and possibly a lot of church shopping before we settled on coming here. And I think that makes us more vested in our opinions than we might otherwise be when it comes to this church. It becomes harder to envision that folks who made most of the same decisions we already made won't agree with us about the rest. And when we don't, most of us are really good at articulating our position. Really, really good. We aren't as good at listening to the position of others, and perhaps worse at being willing to back down from a stance after we've firmly planted our flagpole. After all, we aren't the problem. It's obviously the rest of you. It ends up being up to folks in church leadership to help us reduce our need to be utterly and completely right about everything. I mentioned I'd chaired any number of committees, served as president of the board, co-chaired our ministerial search committee. Herding cats, feral cats, has fallen under my task list more than a few times. In the process of intentionally working with groups, putting procedures in place to ensure the quiet folks get heard and the loudest folks allow others to speak, and that the squeaky wheel isn't the only one getting greased, working to ensure an entire group listens to one another, it turns out you really have to listen yourself. Consequently, my work in church leadership has led to me being a person others ask to facilitate difficult groups or help restore broken relationships. For someone who was fairly and reasonably nicknamed High Empress Tolliday in high school when I worked as an assistant director for drama productions, that's a significant shift. Friday was my last day teaching, ending 39 years in the classroom. Tomorrow, I move to Bishop, California, so it's all about transitions for me right now. I've been part of this church community for 17 years. In those years, I've learned to reframe religious language into language I can not only tolerate, but use to connect with those who have different faiths and faith traditions. I've learned how to find my passions and serve even when not passionately committed because the greater community needs it. I've learned how to tone down my own ego and listen to others so that we can move forward together. I have grown so very much in the 17 years with this church, and I want to tell you how much I'll miss you and to thank you. Thank you for believing in me more than I believed in myself. Thank you for holding me to high standards. Thank you for pushing me to do more. Thank you for the space to grow, for the grace you've given when I often stumbled at those growing edges, when I've been unskillful in my communications, when I've been less than I aspire to be. I'm going to end with one of Reverend Tim's favorite sources for inspiration, connection, and rejuvenation, a Broadway musical. Who can say if I've been changed for the better? I do believe I have been changed for the better. Because I knew you, I have been changed for good. Thank you.